sheet is going around, and so be sure to sign that for today. What we're going to do, as promised last time, we're going to finish talking about marketing research, and then I will do an exam review in which I will stand up here and read every question that will be a potential question on all three of the exams to you. The order may differ because obviously they're mixed up. Some of them are combined questions, so but I'll give you every single question that is on any three of the versions of the exam, so that you'll be well prepared for that. They all basically cover the same thing. I did want to show you one thing before we did that, and that is I told you that I would provide a Dropbox for you to turn in your article reviews, which according to the syllabi are due on the 19th. Is that correct? So I have created a Dropbox. If you go, I have a student view here. If you go to assessments, click on assessments, and then go to Dropbox, there should be a Dropbox there that says article review, and that's where you'll submit your article review so that I can grade it and not lose it this semester when the car door opens and I have to run across, looking at the papers. It will also make it easier for me to get feedback to you very, very quickly. I try to get those graded extraordinarily quick so that you have an opportunity to see your grade. And have any questions or things like that, I can answer those fairly quickly. However, I will say that there are 100 and I think 10 of you in this class right now, currently enrolled. The last time I checked the enrollment, so it may take me more than a week. I try to do it within a week, but it may take me just a little bit longer because of the size of the class. So are there any questions about that? Yeah. All right, good. So everything is clear. That's fantastic. So we were talking about market research, and I said that one of the things that I disagree with the text is it says the first step in the scientific method, right? This is the hard science part of marketing, is defining the problem. Well, how do you know there's a problem? You have to find observation. Now, generally in the business, what's this observation going to be? You're going to notice that your sales are dropping off, right? Or that people, your customers, are giving you feedback. You should be open to these and looking for this and doing that environmental scan. So this is how marketing research and environmental scanning, and again, because marketing is the only fully integrated function of the firm, that's a test question, by the way, you should know that. Marketing is the only fully integrated function of the firm. You have to understand how these concepts are not mutually exclusive, they're all interrelated, and you need to be able to integrate the whole thing. So a lot of our observations are going to come from that environmental scan, particularly in things like the social and competitive environment, things like that. So the next step is then to define the problem. So we notice, for example, that business is falling off in one of our product lines. How can we either increase that, right? What can we do to increase it? Or maybe we need to think about harvesting that product line and using it to come up with research and development into another product. So the second step, after we define the problem and set our objectives, is to develop a research plan. And in developing this research plan, and this is a test question, you have to always be aware of the limitations of the research project. No research project can get everything, right? And once you conduct marketing research, you have to remember that it's a snapshot, because marketing is not a static discipline. I often think that it would be much easier if I could teach history than marketing, right? Because if you're a historian and your specialty is the Renaissance, the Quattrocento, right? Well, that doesn't change very much, right? Because it's in the past. We know what happened. We know when Machiavelli was born and when he died. Marketing changes. It's a dynamic discipline. And so you have to constantly remember that. And in thinking about these things and in developing, in step 2, this research plan, you have to constantly be aware of the null hypothesis and the constraints. There are 2 great fallacies that businesses oftentimes engage in, and it can be fatal to them in terms of their success. The vast majority of businesses fail, and this is a test question. Those two fatal things in thinking about this and in doing this environmental scan and in doing research are overlooking alternatives. These are two great fallacies. And second, drawing conclusions from too little evidence, not paying attention to the right kind of methods. Now, you all will have to have business research. And if you get a marketing degree, you have to have marketing research, right? So you all have had, for the most part, I think most of you probably have had your business statistics class. Is that correct? How many of you have that? So you have to think about the appropriate method, right? And you have to remember that in drawing these conclusions, so if we set up a research plan and we're going to determine whether or not we can sell more widgets, or whether or not we should expand our business into a new market for widgets, we don't want to assume, for example, that correlation equals causation. And I can give you an example of this, right? One of the methods that we use a lot in marketing, in certain types of research, particularly in prediction of trends, is regression analysis. How many of you have heard of regression? Anybody remember regression from business statistics? So what does regression do? Regression uses a dependent variable to predict, or an independent variable, an independent variable to predict a dependent variable. So if you have just two variables, and you can have multiple regression, you can get more complex, and there are models, econometric models particularly, that get more complex. What you're trying to predict is a value for the dependent variable y. Now let's suppose that we have a hypothesis. We observe that over time, for example, the money supply has increased. You all have had economics. How can the money supply increase? Okay. What's one of the ways that you can increase the money? So, if I ask, okay, absolutely, lower interest rates. The Federal Reserve controls two key interest rates, right? The discount rate and the federal funds rate. Years ago, when I was an undergraduate student, you could actually go down to the Federal Reserve Bank in Oklahoma City, the branch, and you could see the discount window. That's no longer there. They don't actually do this. That's where banks went to the Federal Reserve to borrow money overnight to meet their reserve requirements. They no longer do that. They control these two discount rates, right? So if you lower interest rates, more people will want to borrow money, right? And banks will lend more money if more people are willing to buy money or borrow money. And that creates money. When I was a little kid and I got my birthday money or my Hanukkah money, my parents made me put that in the bank. And my impression at that time, when I was, 5 or 6 years old, was that I took my $100 bill down to the bank, and they put a sticky note on it, little Granny Geary's money, and they put it in the drawer and waited for me to come back for it. Right? That's not what happens, is it? Is that what happens when you put your money in the bank? No, they do what with it? They loan it out. And so they have to keep a certain percentage of it in reserves. So you might, for example, notice that the money supply increases. You might think something like it might be logical to observe that the number of banks over time has increased. There's all kinds of banks popping up all over the place. In fact, there are banks that even don't have any physical presence anymore. They don't have bricks and mortar. They're simply clicks. There are banks that are bricks and clicks, and then there are some smaller banks that I imagine still don't have clicks, but there are banks that are now completely virtual. What's a completely online bank? They advertise pretty heavily. Anybody remember? Is it Ally? I think it's Ally. I may be wrong on that, but I think it's Ally. It's completely virtual. They have no physical presence. So you might think that the number of banks increasing has increased money supply. And actually, if you do this, I sort of did this as an experiment one time. If you look at, so what you do is you plot, we could say increase in money supply, that would be our dependent, and number of banks is our independent. And if you plot this out in a scatter plot, and what you do when you look at this, it'll look something like that, right? And then you fit a line as close to those little dots as you can. What's left over is called residuals. And this line represents the predicted value of the dependent variable, depending on, say, for example, the number of banks. Now, what you may actually be looking at is not the number of banks, but just the time. There's actually a test in regression that tests for this. So correlation doesn't necessarily equal causation. So you always have to be cognizant of this as you're defining the problem, developing the research plan. What kinds of data might we want to collect? So in thinking about this and developing the research plan, what kinds of data do we use in marketing? A lot of times we don't actually use, it's a scientific discipline, but we don't actually use experimental type data. Why is that? It's really hard to experiment on people, right? Well, you can do it. And I'll show you a video when we get to consumer behavior on a marketing brand scholar named Brian Wansink that actually does do some experimental design in human behavior and in consumption patterns, particularly with regard to food. And it's really kind of interesting to see how he does that. And I think it's a perfectly ethical study. But it's difficult to isolate all of the variables that might go into a decision. So a lot of the types of research that we do in marketing are going to be what kinds? You probably get these all the time in terms of marketing research, like at Walmart. When you get your receipt at Walmart, they ask you to do what? Surveys. They ask you to go online and fill out a survey in the hopes that you will win a $5,000 shopping spree at Walmart. And they ask you for your opinion on things. So that's one of the things that we do. We do a lot of survey research. Now, the nice thing about survey research is that we can do what? We can do a lot of it. It's fairly cheap to collect anymore as a result of computing power. We can collect a lot of data very easily, but does it give us a lot of rich data? Not necessarily. So what are some of the other marketing techniques that we might think about as we're developing the research plan? More in-depth feedback. And how do you get things like that rather than just surveys? Interviews. You can actually do it with surveys. You can get, extended surveys, but you can do it with interviews. So in-depth interviews, focus groups, things like consumer ethnography. That's a test question. Consumer ethnography. Consumer ethnography is the in-depth study of how people use products, for example. It involves actually watching them. And I've just gotten a chapter published in a book on ethics in consumer ethnography. Actually going in and watching consumers in their natural habitat, how they use products. Yes, ma'am?
How do you spell that?
ETH. Ethnography.
So the test is higher than multiple choice.
Yes, it's 50 questions, multiple guess.
Just the 882.
Multiple guess and true false. 882E is the Scantron that you use. It's the thin green one. You can use any of those forms. Now the nice thing about consumer ethnography, in-depth interviews, focus groups, and things like that is we can get a lot of rich data. What's the limitation in that type of study design? It may be more difficult to generalize that data into the population as a whole. Because it's hard to tell why one person does something and then apply that, and that's a logical fallacy. If you try to apply characteristics of the individual to the aggregate, you might run into problems. So developing this plan, what kinds of things are we going to need? Then we're going to do what? We're going to collect the data. And you might start out with a focus group or consumer ethnography, and then you switch over to quantitative data and do market tests to see if people are actually going to buy this based on the stuff that you learn in those in-depth studies. So we're going to collect the data. Then we have to what? Analyze the data that we've collected. And finally, take marketing action. It does no good to do this and then do nothing with it. It's become far easier to do this. A lot of businesses don't think that they can afford to do market research because it's expensive. But I showed you a video of one way that you can get somebody else, a third-party vendor, to do market research based on Facebook stuff fairly cheaply. Because we've got this voluminous amount of stuff out there that we can look at. And businesses should continually engage in market research. I can give you an example of one of the ways that we've done this in my own business. How many of you have looked at TripAdvisor? How many of you have used TripAdvisor's advice when you booked hotels, vacation planning? A couple of you. It's good, it's great information. For example, the Hotel Pennsylvania, I was doing a study on content analysis of TripAdvisor reviews. And the Hotel Pennsylvania in downtown New York is located right across from Penn Station. It's a great location. But when you read reviews that say things like, it's a little house of horrors, a filthy chamber of torture, you might want to avoid those places, right? And we do this in my business. We constantly monitor our reviews on TripAdvisor all the time. We collect this kind of, and I've developed coding sheets to help us analyze what it is that our customers are saying about my business. And then we take corrective action. We've actually changed stuff that we've done. It's one of the things that I do in here in trying to provide value co-creation is I actually look at the student evaluations and see what kinds of things that you say that you're interested in, what kinds of areas of the course you wanted to have more knowledge in, and then I try to tailor that and make corrections every semester. Are there questions about market research? I own Stone Line Inn in Guthrie. Yeah, we're the oldest bed and breakfast in the state of Oklahoma. We've owned it for 30 years, my family and I. So we do the murder mysteries. Yes, sir. We do. That's correct. So if you want, at this point, I'm going to let you bring your stuff down here, your devices, your mobile phones, whatever you want to use to record, and you can just capture the audio portion of this if you want. Again, you're always free to do this if you don't want to watch the video, or if you just want to rely on the video, that's fine as well. But I give that as an opportunity, particularly when I do the reviews. So I will go through question by question, all three versions of the exam. I'll try to stand still, I won't walk around so much.
like videos? Voice memos there.
All right. So this is the 3 copies. I've got all 3 copies of the exam here. I took all 3 versions this morning. I made 100 on every single one so that we know that this exam is fair and balanced, just like Fox News. And you can absolutely score 100 on it. I've shown you 3 videos, and you need to know all 3 versions of the exam have questions about those videos and the substance of those videos. There are 5 or 6 questions regarding those videos. So you should know things like what each video is titled and who presented in it. So far we've watched 3 TED videos. The presenters are Sugata Mitra, Alessandro Isti, and Franz de Waal. And you should know something about the substance of each of those. What do each of them present, and how can those be applied to marketing? What kinds of things can you take away? Things that I've talked about in class that you can actually apply. So for example, the idea of value co-creation, and how we can use those videos for that. You should know something about marketing ethics, because that's my area of interest, and so there's a lot of questions on ethics. There are 3 challenges to philosophical ethics. You should know what those are. And why they are problematic. What makes an ethical theory valid, and the challenges to ethics not valid. We talked about defining the domain of marketing and those changes in the domain of marketing, beginning with the first definition of marketing from the Marketing Teachers Association, which was picked up, which is the precursor to the AMA, and maybe some problems with that definition, to the contemporary definition, which is listed in your textbook. And then I said that that definition needed to be modified in one way to reflect something, and that is a test question. The notion that marketing is the only fully integrated function of the firm, you should know that, what that means. We talked about environmental scanning, and you should know all of the different elements that make up an environmental scan. And there are a number of questions, I believe there are 5, that ask you to identify which type of substantive example would fall into each of those categories. So for example, we talked about federalism and how marketers in the United States have to recognize that the federal system imposes two levels of bureaucracy that you have to go through that may be different than other environments across the globe where countries have a unitary system of government. And all power is derived from the national government. In the United States, we have this idea of dual sovereignty and what that implies for marketing. So for example, things like restaurants. You want to open a restaurant, who's going to regulate food, production, and things like that? The FDA at the national level. And you just go out and slaughter your own cow in the backyard and carve it up and serve it in your restaurant. No. You're going to have a problem doing that. And then you're also regulated by the state as to things like the proper handling methods of the food once it's slaughtered. So what kind of implications does that have? And we talked about some models of federalism that we have experienced in this country where it used to be that the regulation that marketers faced was largely at the state level, and now it's maybe at the national level. We talked about goals. You should know what makes a good goal. We talked about what makes this class a little different than any other class. So there's a question that says, which of the following statements about marketing is most accurate? You should be able to identify, kind of think about this class. How is it different than other classes? You walked in the door and you are already what? You're already marketers. You're already experts. You should know what percentage of businesses fail. In terms of this environment that marketing exists in, what are the common factors among an organization's board of directors, stakeholders, suppliers, employees, customers, and society at large? Marketing seeks to blank what in terms of needs and wants. You should know what the definition of a prospective customer is. How exchange plays a role. How marketing departments differ from other departments in a business. For example, accounting. Accounting primarily deals with internal constituents. Marketing departments not only deal with internal constituents in terms of providing needs, but also what? External. We talked about SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. The text lists 4 factors that are necessary for marketing to occur. You should know what the central concerns of marketing are. You need to know the definition of an organization. And then there's also a question about the types of organizations that are out there. You should know what the definition of an offering is and be able to identify one. You should know the definition of profit. There are 3 questions about industries. What constitutes an industry, for example? Be able to identify examples of industries. You need to know something about strategy. In complex organizations, how many levels are there? So if you have a large corporation with strategic business units, you should know what a strategic business unit is. The text talks about differences, and you should be able to identify the roles, for example, of the chief executive officer, the chief operating officer, chief marketing officer. What is the key role of the marketing department? We talked about philosophy in terms of marketing philosophies, and you should know those eras. What are the 3 questions that philosophy attempts to answer? Why is it that you get a PhD, you get a terminal degree in marketing? Terminal degree makes it sound fatal. Different types of knowledge. Knowledge based on experience versus knowledge based on rational thought. You should understand what the terms teleological, T-E-L-E-O-L-O-G-I-C-A-L, and deontological mean, D-E-O-N-T-O-L-O-G-I-C-A-L. We talked about forms of different ethical theories. So for example, duty ethics has 2 forms. Utilitarian ethics has 2 forms. The criticisms of those. the definition of marketing research. There are some substantive questions about different types. For example, if a company is undertaking a particular type of marketing research, what they should do first. You should know both what I added is the first step and then what the text says is the first step. And there is a distinction. If it's mine, it will say, according to your instructor, what's the first step in the scientific method? It says, what is the first step in marketing research? That's the text question. And the second step of marketing research, that's the text. Then there are a number of bonus questions. A on those is true, B is false. Do you all have any questions about the first exam? Again, 50 questions for that will be counted, and there's some bonus questions, multiple guess, true, false. Yes, ma'am. You have to bring your own Scantron. The university's poor. We don't provide Scantrons. They're expensive. If you don't bring your own Scantron, I sell them for 50 cents a piece. So, but I will charge you 50 cents. So bring your own. Form 882E. You can use 882E loaves, 882E brackets, the 882 compatible, which is the cheap version that they sell at the other place. So, any other questions?